Happy Advent again, Wednesday Conversation listeners. I'm Pastor Bob Thune, here to introduce again an older episode of the podcast that we are bringing back in response to a listener question. On Wednesdays, we sit down to talk about how the gospel of Jesus Christ connects to the questions and issues of everyday life. And today we are talking about contraception and family planning in response to a listener question. You can go back to last week's episode to listen to that question. And I want to remind you again, if you generally listen to this podcast in the car or with younger kids, you might want to delay listening to this one until such time as you feel comfortable listening to it. We are going to talk frankly about some issues related to human sexuality and family planning, and we want to make sure that that's age appropriate for where you listen and when you listen. So take note of that. Here now is part 2 of the podcast we recorded some years ago. You're going to hear myself, Dusty White, Chris Hemmelman, Mike Kresnick, and also our special guest, Jen Newman.
As we've started this series of podcasts, we've been focusing primarily on the ethical side of things, of just, are we thinking Christianly about these topics, and acknowledging that chemical forms of birth control and IUDs function by abortive means, or can function by abortive means, create some serious ethical issues for Christians. So what that leaves open then, if we're going to talk about contraception, is barrier methods or fertility awareness methods as probably the two that we can embrace with the least issues of conscience, with the most ethical freedom. And so I want to acknowledge that and just say I want to say the ethical questions need to be foundational here, because we're saying something about what's right and wrong when it comes to human life. But Jen, you're also bringing in sort of the medical and self-knowledge aspect of things, and saying that actually a method like fertility awareness method helps a woman get to know her body in ways that can really be helpful for fuller issues of health and wholeness.
So another thing that you had mentioned, Bob, was how physicians are starting to give young girls birth control for acne problems or other issues that help control their cycle if they have a heavy cycle or a light cycle. And that, it frustrates me to no end, because first off, hormonal birth control does not level out or normalize your cycle. It shuts down your body's natural flow of hormones and mimics a cycle. And so we don't really know what that's going to do to young girls who decide to go off it after 10, maybe 15 years of just being on birth control, and when they decide to start having kids. And so I just want to, challenge people as physicians or their doctors offer this as an option, to really think about what the long-term implications could be, and if there are other options that they could turn toward to level out their cycle or make it lighter if it's painful or if there's other issues, that this should not be the default option for young girls who are having issues with their cycles.
Jen, where can people go? You mentioned one book. Is that the primary book you'd recommend, or where can people go to find out more about this?
Yeah, I would recommend Taking Charge of Your Fertility. It's like a textbook, and so it has quite a bit of information. And Kindara really is the best app for tracking your cycle, and they have a website and a blog that really walks through how to track your cycle in like simple terms. And then just to find somebody that also practices it. Like, I would love to talk to anybody who is interested in learning more, or is skeptical, or who has just heard that, natural family planning is guesswork. I want to just help dispel any of that and be as helpful as I can. So find somebody who does it. That's the easiest way to learn, is to come alongside somebody and have the weirdest questions to ask somebody ever.
If you want to do internet research, factsaboutfertility.org is a good website that is grounded in all of these fertility awareness methods. And so you can start there. I'd recommend the book because it's going to be way more detailed, but the website is a good place to start just to learn. I want to reiterate, if you're using another method of birth control right now, the goal of these podcasts isn't to like create shame, but hopefully to create awareness, hopefully to make you step back and ask some questions and go, I need to reevaluate or think through this in more detail, because I think that, as we shared before, that's the story of all of us sitting around the table, is kind of going, well, I used to be okay with this, but now that I've done some more research, I'm not sure I should be. And that's what I imagine will be happening for lots of folks as they listen, is just stepping back and asking some of these broader questions. Also, in our culture, it's a little bit countercultural, and you should embrace that as a good thing. Our culture, because of the influence of sort of radical feminism, doesn't want to invite women to think about the complications or implications of various forms of birth control. In fact, there's, in general, the easiest and sort of simplest thing to do is put people on the pill. And you got to realize, right, there's capitalist motives there that makes pharmaceutical companies money. It's easy for doctors to prescribe. If you think about public health, it's just easy to say, oh, well, if everybody's on the pill, then we can count on these sort of, these sort of social realities. And as Christians, that's another thing I think we sort of want to be countercultural and push against, is just to say, let's not do what everybody's doing just because everybody's doing it. Let's be the kind of people who are stepping back and going, what honors the Lord, and what different decisions should we make because of our convictions and where we come from in terms of understanding of God and self.
Yeah, and this tends to be a weird battle for women, especially as they're seeing their physicians. I mean, before we got married, my physician asked me, and so what are you guys going to do for birth control? And I said, we're going to practice the fertility awareness method. And she said, so you'd be okay if something happened, right? And I said, I mean, sure, but I hopefully plan to practice it correctly and have it be effective. And so there are going to be hard conversations and hard pushback because it's not the easier option for people to pick.
That's really helpful to know. And so that even more important than to have a community of women you can lean on for wisdom to sort of help you think about this, because it sounds like some doctors probably aren't going to see that as a great choice. Mm-hmm. Hormonal birth control is on the World Health Organization list of Group 1 carcinogens, next to things like tobacco, asbestos, and the active ingredient of sulfur mustard, which is used in chemical warfare.
Oh, so my gosh.
No one's going to tell you that. And again, there's a lot of...
But Bob Thune will on the Wednesday conversation. No, keep going.
Yeah, and I'm reading from an article on the Public Discourse that's written by an MD, PhD. And again, these are the kinds of... This data is out there, but there's a lot of pressure societally to sort of keep it from being in plain view. And when you realize, hormonal birth control can have some serious side effects. And that, I'm not saying it's going to in every case, but I just think, gosh, if it's not a list of carcinogens, that's one of those things, might want to not ingest that into my body for 40 or 50 years. And so, again, I'm not giving you that data just to sort of, just to be provocative, but because I think it's important to understand these things. So the internet's a wonderful thing. Start doing research, and you will find that you can learn a lot about these various forms of contraception, and a lot that you probably need to dig for and look for to help make wise and informed decisions.
We wanted to tackle two questions that came in that I feel like are on maybe tackle two different life stages in which the majority of our listeners might be at. The first one came from a woman who is 24 years old, just married, and asking, like, hey, me and my husband, we feel like kids. Should we be having kids? What should our mindset be as young marrieds? Are we ready to have kids? Should we have kids? And what's the best way to prevent that or not prevent that? So,
man, I got a little autobiography for you people now. All right. Here we go. Story time with Pastor Bob. I'm 42 years old. I'm like an old guy.
Settle in.
But I got married when I was 22. And so, man, I resonate with this because I was a young, wide-eyed, I don't even know what I'm doing with my life guy at age 22. And Lee and I were, we're going to wait 5 years. I mean, 5 years from now is an eternity, and we're still going to be in our 20s. We're not having kids anytime soon. We're going to wait. We're going to sort of get to know each other. We're going to figure out what we're doing with our lives. We'll have kids later. That was our mindset. And then we got pregnant with our son 12 months into marriage. And he was born, 9 months after that. So within the first 2 years of marriage, we were parents. And I will tell you, when my wife told me, hey, I'm pregnant, I freaked out for a few days. Like I seriously, I had to like go hang with some friends and just say like, what in the world? Like, I don't even know what to do with this, because it was really life altering. And so I can resonate with the heart behind that question, in the sense of like, man, I don't even know what I'm doing with my life. I'm not ready to raise a child or be responsible for a human being. I'm trying to figure out what it means to be married. So existentially, I just want you to know, like, I've been in your shoes, even though I'm now an old, wise, seasoned father of 4 who knows all these wonderful things about being a parent. And I'm just kidding. So here's what I would say, though. We have to start. I want to answer your question theologically before I answer it existentially. Theologically speaking, if you are married, you are ready to have children and need to be. You should not get married unless you realize, hey, part of what comes with marriage is the possibility of parenthood. And I think our culture wants to reinforce this narrative that like, well, getting married is sort of about you and about what you want. And then like when you want kids sometime in the future, then you can just flip that switch on and then you start thinking about having kids. And we've so separated marriage and child raising or childbearing that we think of them in separate categories, but that's not how they're supposed to be biblically. Biblically, it's like, man, if you're married, guess what comes with that? You might get pregnant and become a mom and a dad. And that's a good thing. Now, is it still okay to wonder, gosh, I don't know if I'm ready for that? Of course it is. Like existentially, all the angst and all the questions surrounding that aren't going to go away. But theologically, we should not separate the possibility of parenthood from marriage. That's very much what marriage is about, is bringing a family together, a mom and a dad who have the capacity perhaps to raise children. That doesn't mean they're going to in every case, but that should be seen as an inevitable result of marriage.
Yeah, I feel like, man, me and my wife, she was 19. I was 21 when we were married. You too, Dustin?
Dang, you were younger than me.
Well, I was 20. My wife was 21. But yeah,
Babies.
Basically young and ridiculous.
What are you guys doing getting married that young, man?
We were homeschooled, man.
No, not it. That was not. I'm all public school all the way. Not proud of it.
But like we had lots of conversations about how many kids we wanted to have. You know, we were on the same page getting married, but even when we found out we were pregnant, it was just like, holy crap, like this is intense. And so like, even if you think you're ready to have kids, it's still intense, you know, and you don't feel ready, but, yeah, having those conversations early on. Jen, you talked about last week, you and Ryan were talking about not just having kids, but how you were going to prevent having kids and being ready to have kids and all that before you're even married. And so having those conversations early on is super helpful, I think, in just preparing for that time of, you know, having kids. Yeah.
And I'm even wondering that, like, if there's another part of this question of maybe we're not even financially ready to have kids. And I feel like that's a big part for young married couples, is wondering, what does it look like to be financially ready? And I mean, we're pregnant right now and I'm still like, what does it look like to be financially ready?
Yeah, you're never financially
ready. You're never really ready.
Hey, look, if you do end up having kids, guess what's going to be there? A lot of grace. Like God is going to give you the grace because it's actually the right thing. It's like actually you're doing what marriage was intended to do. And so God is going to bless that and give you grace for that, even if the circumstances are challenging. So,
Chris, I love how you think on this stuff. And I even don't like the use of the word risk. Like should we risk getting pregnant and having kids? Children are a blessing, and the Bible demands that we see children as a blessing. And so let's not talk about childbearing as a risk, even though I get where that language comes from, and I know how it feels existentially. You feel like, I'm not ready for this. But man, children are always a blessing. Let's receive them as such, and let's even think about the possibility of them as such.
Yeah, having kids was one of the most sanctifying things that happened in my life. Like, I was 23 years old when we had Alina, our first child, and it made me get off my butt because there was like a heavy load that was put on me. And so as a man, it felt risky, it felt scary, but it like propelled me into like, okay, this marriage thing, this being a dad thing, this being a Christian, this being a disciple thing, like this has some weight to it now, and I've got to get my game on.
So if you're married, you should be okay with the potential of having children, and you should see them as a blessing. It's interesting to think pastorally too, as I'm reflecting over here. I think about the conversations I've had with lots of couples about this, you know, like, well, we don't want to have kids because we want to, and then they fill in the blank, and it's usually not
travel.
godly. Yeah, it's usually travel, and we want to get to know each other a little bit more. And it's to be more blunt or frank, it's actually usually selfish desire. And so it's interesting to think about marriage should be selfless, and then the possibility of children will reveal your selfishness as well, right? So you have to get outside of yourself to take care of another person. You have to get outside of yourself to take care of children and offspring. And so I'm sure that there are some good and godly reasons to not have children. We've had conversations with people like that, but mostly it comes from a selfish motive to not.
No one ever feels ready to have kids. No one ever feels like, oh, it's the perfect time for me to start a family. Like, because I got all this money in the bank and because I have the, everything's all paid off.
We're so settled.
That's never the reality. And so don't live for that false ideal that says, I'm going to get to this place where we're going to feel ready to have kids. Yeah. No, you're not. You're never going to feel like, I guarantee you're going to feel overwhelmed about the reality of welcoming a human being into the world and being responsible for their entire shaping and raising. Yeah. You're there right now.
Yeah, and I'll even say, like, we are pregnant before we had planned on it. And it was because God said, like, you need to stop preventing. And so that was really scary to feel like I remember sitting down with Dusty and he said, I think the question you need to ask is, are you being disobedient by preventing pregnancy right now? And I felt like, I feel like we're not listening to what the Holy Spirit's saying to us and saying, I think it's time now where it was not in our plan. Like, my husband won't be done with school. We don't have a house. And there are things that I would prefer to have set up to feel safe. But throughout the whole pregnancy and what's coming down the pipeline, the Lord is just saying, trust me and I will provide. And this child is a blessing. And we're really looking forward to it.
Here's a final interesting fact about this. Sociologists, have done research, and here's what it shows. The more children a man has, the more money that man makes. Why do you think that's the case?
Mike's making it rain over there.
It's certainly not because rich people are the only ones who have lots of children. It's because the more kids you have, the more you realize, gosh, I need to provide, right? Mm-hmm. So the having of children forces you to grow up, to create earning potential. And sociologists are fascinated by this data because what it shows is men especially really do live into responsibility rather than sort of get everything figured out and then take on responsibility. And so that's an important thing to remember, especially if you're young and feeling like, man, we're not ready for kids. Well, look, kids are going to grow you up in good ways, in the right ways. Yep. You want to tackle the second question, Mike?
Yeah. So we're talking about young marrieds, singles, contemplating marriage and kids. Let's go to the other end of life. Our question comes from another listener. He's expressing that they've got multiple kids, 4, 5, 6 kids. God tells us to be fruitful and multiply. When your wife is feeling the stress of, one, the body giving birth to 5 or 6 kids, and then also feeling the mental stress of being home with 5 or 6 kids, and mom and dad feeling the pressures of discipling all those kids, when is it wise to maybe stop having kids? And what's a gospel-centered way to approach that conversation, to approach that decision without feeling like you're in disobedience to God's command?
I was just going to say, this is a hard question because it's just it's hard to get out of the cultural blinders on this one. I think it's a great question. It's just hard. It's hard to know. Like, I feel that tension very deeply of like, how do I know if I'm rightly drawing a close to this period of my life or not? And that's a perplexing question. You've been there, Dusty. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say, number one, you can't make these decisions in isolation. So
preach that.
You have to bring people into these decisions. You have to go real slow. And I would even say you could also possibly slow down the rate in which you're having children. If fertility is not a struggle in your situation, you could also slow down the rate in which you're having children. But I think it's wise to take into consideration the physical health, the emotional health, my marital communication, all of those things when it comes to a couple who can have lots of children. JC and I have faced this. We have 6 kids. Our plan is to be done at 6 children. And the reason why is because we want to As I've mentioned on previous podcasts, we take family pretty seriously. We take discipleship pretty seriously. And I feel like having 6 children that I'm primarily responsible for, the discipleship of, the formation of, seems like a lot. Seems like enough is what I should say. Not too much, but it feels like, man, I really got to trust the Lord outside of myself to just do this well. So at some point, I am of the position that you can have too many children. And so, yeah, that would be an interesting thing to unpack. But
how did you and your wife end up there? I imagine that those weren't like quick decisions, quick conversations. Like, bring us into that if you can.
Yeah, part of it's health, just physical health, limitation. So, there's some that would say like, well, as long as you're fertile, you should have children. Well, or until the Lord decides that you're not going to have them anymore. I would just say there's also a wisdom issue here. And so like there's physical health reasons. You're also getting older. You're having younger children at an older age. And so we wanted to be able to disciple all of our children into those different stages of life. So we have a 2-year-old and we have a teenager, and so like we want to be able to engage each level pretty intentionally. And for those of you who know me, I try to do that with a lot of diligence. And so that's kind of how we reached that decision of just how much is too much and can we effectively make disciples out of all these people in the way that we think the Lord has convicted us to do so.
So what I hear you saying, Dusty, is that it's okay to admit capacity, like to basically say, I recognize my own limitations in deciding this, and it's okay to say, hey, 6, 5, 4, 3, whatever the number is, to say, okay, I think this is all by faith. I think the Lord has given me capacity for.
Yeah, and those are some hard conversations because it's humbling.
Yeah, well, here's my pushback.
Yeah.
What if my capacity is 1 or 2? Because, man, I got to be able to have a 401k and a college fund for all of them and set them up for life. And like, if I'm evaluating capacity not based on health or discipleship, but based on, well, gosh, it costs a lot of money to have kids, and I kind of feel like this is my limit.
Yeah.
Because that's where it gets challenging to me, to just start having questions about like, well, if we're saying it's okay to set your capacity, how do you go through that and sort that out?
Yeah, it becomes really subjective.
Yeah, totally. Everybody's got a different capacity, and everybody has different desires that inform that capacity too.
So are there biblical desires to help give us foundations for to have the right capacity or to have the right perspective on those things?
This is the funny thing is like there needs to be freedom here, right? Like there's Christian freedom. Each person is going to answer to God for their own life. And so I want to stop short of being like prescriptive, like, well, here's how many kids you should have, or every Christian should think about their family this way. But I do also think our culture also presses us to think differently about capacity, right? And if you listen to even like quote unquote Christian wisdom, it's sort of like, well, gosh, you're going to have to put all these kids through college. And so you better have $100,000 saved up for each of your kids. And you start thinking about that at age 25, you're like, well, I guess I'm having a kid because it's going to take me a while to save $100,000.
Is there a way to have 0.5 kids?
Yeah. So that's all. I'm trying to honor the freedom aspect and the reality of capacity, but also ask the question of like, what are the biblical principles by which we should think through these things?
Well, I think it goes back to what you said, Dusty, is that you can't make these decisions in isolation. You have to bring other perspectives in. Don't just bring your peers who are in the same life stage as you. Bring older, wiser people who maybe have a handful of kids already, and that you can learn from their perspective and, just get outside insight into your life rather than just what you see right in front of you. Guys, help me think about God's command to be fruitful and multiply. If and when you decide as a married couple to not have kids anymore, does that mean you're not obeying that command? Or is there a way to continue to obey that command and it's not necessarily in procreation?
I don't think we can say to obey that command means you're having as many kids as is humanly possible until you can't have them. I mean, that's how our great-grandparents would have looked at it. That my great-grandfather had 10 children because they didn't have any methods of birth control other than natural methods, and they saw children as a blessing, and it was just like, well, we get pregnant. But I don't think we can see that command, Mike, as like I'm disobeying it if I decide, gosh, at this point my family is full and I need to make a decision about sort of moving into the next season of, I need to make a decision to choose not to conceive. It seems to me that there's Christian freedom there, and that I'm not disobedient to that command by choosing not to have children. I think the reason I'm hesitant to say that is because I think there's people who would disagree with that, and thoughtful people who would disagree with that. So I want to honor that.
I think if you're telling husbands and wives, have children for as long as you're fertile, that becomes prescriptive. Yeah. And there's no option of, okay, so what is wise for our situation? And that comes back to Dusty saying, don't make that decision in isolation. Yeah. Like, you're working through the nuances of your family and what would be wise.
It seems to me, if we're going to ask the question of capacity, we want to be careful not to base that on the idol of comfort. Mm-hmm. Right? Like I think there's honest capacity of just like, man, here's the limit that we have as far as what we're called to do. And then there's also sort of like, well, it seems like it would be harder if we had more kids. And so I don't want to have more kids because it might make me get a bigger van and I don't want to, I couldn't drive a, VW Bug anymore, whatever. And so it seems to me like there's some biblical principles here to say, I need to honor children as a blessing and welcome them. I need to see a large family as a good and noble thing, right? In general, having a good number of kids, I think, is incumbent upon Christians, and Christians have always thought that way. I mean, if you look at church history, there's always been this sense of, gosh, we ought to be, part of how we fill the world with Christians is by actually raising them ourselves, not just by leading them to Christ in evangelism. So welcoming the idea of a large family, but also honoring the reality of capacity and saying, man, there's going to come a time when, based on emotional or physical realities or the place we feel like we are, it's okay to ask the question, okay, is our, to use the sort of parlance, is our quiver full? Is this where the Lord wants us to stop?
Well, friends, the goal of this podcast is to equip our own church for discipleship and mission. So if you're a Christian or church leader in another context, thanks as always for listening in. We pray that this conversation might be helpful to you as you minister in your context and as you think about important topics for the people of God. We do always love to hear from listeners, and we often let listeners decide what topics we will be talking about. So if you have thoughts, questions, or topics you want us to consider, send an email, podcast@cdomaha.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time for another episode of the Wednesday Conversation.